Welcome now to the 24/7 Sports Series Social Distance. The head coach, the Maryland Terrapins, Mike Locksley, but maybe some folks might know him better as the host of Late Night with Locks. Coach, I think if this coaching stuff ends up running its course, you may have a gig in the media world as a talk show host. Your guest list has been off the charts. I was watching a lot of those leading up to this interview. Man, you seem like you're having some fun with that.
Well, Barton, it's really important to be very versatile in these challenging times. And,
Right.
With the question mark of whether we play football, I figured I better figure out some way to try to make a living. So I kind of forged into your part of the world and doing a little bit of media things. But no, it's really been great for me because it gives us an opportunity to just get away from the craziness of the pandemic, and everything you hear, read, or see on the news is about the pandemic. And for me, it's been really refreshing to catch up with friends, all things DMV, former players that I've had opportunities to recruit, coach. So it's been a kind of a nice way to get away from the norm.
Yeah, well, one of the stories that I really enjoyed hearing told, and there's a bunch of good ones, but I come from a recruiting background. So when DeQuell Jackson was talking about, how he kind of put you through the ringer the night before National Signing Day, I thought that was fun to hear his perspective and your perspective on it. I'm just curious. I mean, look, it made me think. I mean, that was all the way back in like 2006. You've been in some wars for prospects for a long time, in some serious battles. I'm just curious in your history as a coach, like what are kind of the crazy signing day stories or just recruiting stories that are seared in your mind when you think of just the tough battles of recruiting?
Yeah, the DeQuell one by far was one of the toughest, at least for me, because, that was in the age where it wasn't take a picture. It was like literally I'm on the phone with him and I'm trying to convince him to it's already signed. I'm like, just put it in the fax machine. And I just hear his coach in the background, Coach Roper, who I've become great friends with over the years, like, no, just wait. You don't have to do that. Don't rush. And so I finally, this is, my year 2 with Ralph Friesen. And I'm finally like, look, I'm leaving to go home. If you send it in, I'm good. If not, whatever. I mean, I was really just done with it because I had put a lot of time, energy, and effort into recruiting DeQuell. And he was a guy that was he was a 3-star for sure. But it started getting a lot of late interest from Florida. They had just hired Ron Zook, who I wound up working for.
Right.
And I know they were coming in hot and heavy as they got hired late. So big time battle, man. I've had a lot of those because unfortunately, I haven't always been at a place where you have some of the built-in advantages like maybe my last job had. I've had the Illinois sweater, I've had the Maryland sweater, and I never kind of back away from recruiting the best players that we can possibly get. And fortunately for me, the DC area has been one of those areas for us. And I've been able to find a way to win a few of those battles.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. And I think, one that I think seems to loom large here recently is just being able to land Rakim Jarrett last year. And obviously that was a kid that was committed to LSU, flipped on signing day or right before, and was, felt like, at least from the outside looking in, a real important seminal recruit in terms of your efforts to really keep these guys home. How would you manage to pull that one off?
Yeah, I wish I could say it was all me. I mean, obviously recruiting is a group effort, and we got a staff. I know Scotty Montgomery, Joker Phillips both recruited as much as I did. But the secret to it to me, and it's kind of been my motto, is that this third-party validation and recruiting is kind of what kind of separates you from others. And, somehow he had forged a relationship via social media with Stephon Diggs, and I hadn't been real aware that they had been communicating. And I know in the end, Stephon's conversation with Rakim played a huge part of it, because I know Rakim grew up when I recruited Stephon to Maryland, and he was a young 7th, 6th grader coming to Maryland games. This area all fell in love with the type of player Stephon Diggs was and what he did for Maryland. And so those two had a mutual kind of a connection in that here it is 4 or 5 years later, Rakim is in the same position to do something similar. And I can tell you, I was as shocked as everybody when he sent me a text, as we're getting text messages and national letters from others saying, Coach, I'm ready to do this. And I'm like, ready to do what? Because we were all of the opinion he would do it in February. He says, no, I'm ready to do it now. And I almost fell out my chair. And again, much like the DeQuell signing, it wasn't as if we had the paperwork sent and that we were planning on him signing. So it was really trying to get his mom on the phone and find a way to get her to get the email, to get all the paperwork signed. And that's why you saw the celebration when it was officially that it came through that he signed. So again, I'd like to say that it was old Coach Locks up to his old tricks, but it was a shock. And to me, it kind of showed the type of character that Rakim had, and that he was willing to come to a place that wasn't already built in. You know, I think back to recruiting like Aurelius Ben to Illinois. It was very similar, and they all seem so eerily similar in that how they go about making these tough decisions in recruiting.
You've really made that kind of keeping the DMV at home a central part of your messaging since you've arrived at Maryland. And look, it makes a ton of sense. And you've been a central figure in recruiting that area for a long time. I'm just curious, why that's been so important to you. And look, is it even realistic to be able to expect one program, regardless of who it is, to keep as much talent as in that area home in one place?
Yeah, I mean, one, it's unrealistic to think that we're going to get every kid from the DMV. That's not going to happen. You look at the way the high schools are set up here. We've got high schools in this area that do a great job of they get kids to come from all over the country. I know St. Francis comes to mind, and that they have a national team basically similar to what IMG has. But for us, it's not necessarily stay home because we're in the DMV. If you look across the board, I mean, when I coached at the University of Florida, 80-90% of our team was from the state of Florida. You look at Texas, you look at Georgia, you look at Alabama, which is maybe a little different because of the size maybe of the state, but most places have to be good. You have to keep your top talent or as much of it as you can. And for us, I mean, if we can get 60% of our class from the DMV and the other 40 from elsewhere, and as you can see, the class we signed this year, which was a top 30, 35, wherever it ranked, we had to go out because if you think about the process of recruiting, as I like to say, it's a 2.5 year cycle. And I mean, here I showed up in January of 19 here at Maryland after the championship game, and I had already had 2 or 3 guys committed for the 20 class to Alabama where I previously worked. And it's hard to have a hat on one week and the next week come in. And so we really put a lot of energy into this 21 class that we're recruiting to develop the relationships, because recruiting is a relationship business. And no, it's not easy, and it's not something that any program can do to keep their top players here. But we would be really remiss if we didn't try. And when I was here during the time, as I call the renaissance of Maryland football, Ralph Friedgen's first 3 years, 01, 02, 03, and you look up the makeup of those teams, I mean, the E.J. Hendersons of the world, the Randy Starks of the world, Vernon Davis, all those guys were local guys. And so we need to get our share of the local guys, but by no means, first of all, we can't take them all because we only have 25 to give. But I also think that staying here at home, and this is the selling point, it isn't to stay here at home because it's home. I really feel we have one of the best situations from a location standpoint to do the best job of developing kids' football resume, playing in the Big Ten Conference, third largest media market, as well as off the field resume of internships, job opportunities. I mean, it's hard to do internships in college towns. We're a suburban campus. I mean, Ellis McKinney, our starting center, did an internship with Senator down on Capitol Hill last summer. You couldn't do that anywhere else. So it's the best of both worlds, which is why we're trying to convince the top local guys that you can build your brand and your resume right here, football and off the field.
So you mentioned building your brand. I'm just curious, are you starting to think through what the impact of the name, image, likeness legislation could have on the way you recruit, on the way you sell Maryland. I mean, what sort of conversation have you had and thoughts have you had on some of those developments in terms of the NIL?
There's still so much stuff left to try to figure out with it. I know the NCAA isn't really fond on us utilizing it as a recruiting pitch. One of the things that we've always sold is location. We're in the middle of two major metropolitan cities in Baltimore and DC that are all within a 20, 30-minute ride of our campus, which we think is a great benefit because where there's commerce, there's opportunities. And again, when I talk about us being in one of the better locations, you look across the Big Ten, you look across the SEC, a lot of the schools are located in college towns that maybe don't have those opportunities. And it's, we sold that from day one because to build a network, when you go to college, earning a degree shows you know how to complete a task, but it's really the network you develop while you're in college that helps you when you move to life after football. And we've been selling that a long time. I've been selling it a long time, being located in, the DC metro area, which is probably the most important city in the world.
Yeah. I want to go back to your time at Alabama because you were part of some, 3 playoff teams, 1 national championship team. And in that 2017 season, your room was the wide receiver room. And you had a few freshmen that were incredible as true freshmen. 2 of them just got drafted in the first round. Another one might go in the first round next year. I'm just curious sort of what you saw out of that group, what you remember out of that group, and how they were able to be so successful so quickly on such a big stage.
I think the first thing that just jumped out was how unselfish a group they were. Because when you think about those guys in 17, with Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, and Jerry Jeudy all coming in as freshmen, you had Calvin Ridley, who was a first-round draft pick, and then you had Robert Foster and Cam Sims, who were both still on NFL teams that were seniors. And we knew right away it wasn't a surprise because, we had those 3 but didn't have a lot of depth behind those guys, that we were going to need those guys early. And I can remember, the first game of the year, which was pegged the game of the century, us versus Florida State, the first game there in the Mercedes-Benz Dome. And we had a plan for playing those young players because they were talented. But the thing that really jumped out about them was how competitive they were, but they were also really unselfish. They understood their roles. I think Coach Saban, along with Brian Dable and our staff, did a really good job of how we use those guys. And, one of the big mantras for us in that room was we really don't care who gets the ball. I mean, let's do the best job we can to create opportunities for yourself. And when the time comes, you take advantage of it. And, I think those 3 did a great job. And then the next year, adding Jalen Waddle to the mix.
Yeah.
It goes to show it's a hard offense to defend when you have that type of talent, when you throw in Damian Harris in the backfield and Najee Harris and the quarterback situation we had, Irv Smith at tight end. So it was a hard offense to defend, obviously, but it was a lot because of those guys being really unselfish, but also still uber competitive in how they approach things.
2 of the biggest names in college football really over the last few years have been Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts, and you've got a great relationship with both of them. I think both of them have been on your late night with Locke show. What was the behind the scenes vibe when that halftime of the national championship game went down and that change was made? And that was such a unique circumstance that you had some insight into. What do you remember about kind of went down in that situation?
Well, I think first of all, there's really only maybe a handful, 1 or 2 or 3 coaches in the country that could make a decision to make a change like that at halftime and not get ridiculed for it. And obviously it paid off for us. But just knowing both those guys and, I thought Jalen showed so much maturity in how he handled it and managed it. I mean, if you look at the rerun of when Tua threw the interception, I think his first hug came from Jalen sprinting off the sideline to hug it out with him in congratulatory fashion. But both guys really competitive. I think everybody in our program knew we were very fortunate to have 2 NFL caliber quarterbacks. As you see, Jalen being taken in the 2nd round and Tua being taken 5th overall. And again, I think you look at the competitiveness of both of them, but yet the mutual respect that went along with the position group. And, obviously Coach Saban had a tough decision to make. He made a tough decision. Jalen had a tough decision to make when Tua was named the starter there the next year, and whether he pack his bag and go home or he stay and continue to develop. And I thought it was really mature on his part. And again, there were a lot of conversations behind the scenes with Jalen as well with Tua. I mean, because if you look at, Tua, I think, because of how we continued to bring Jalen along, it may have cost Tua in the long run for maybe winning the Heisman, but you never heard him complain about it. You never saw the selfishness that comes with what you see out of kids. And I think that to me is kind of the culture that's been developed at Alabama. And it's one that I think that we're working to try to develop here, where we're going to recruit some really talented players. And I think that as long as you put your personal goals aside for the sake of the team winning, everybody has a chance to benefit from it. And I think that's what really stands out. Both those guys were great locker room guys, great teammates, really competitive, but also really unselfish in how they went about things.
So I want to get back to Maryland football now. And it was unfortunately for you and for a lot of folks, obviously didn't get a chance to see you guys in the spring. No spring game, spring practice. But this is typically a time when people like me are sort of starting to circulate the names that popped up over the course of spring, the guys that are starting to emerge. I'm just curious if you could, I don't know, give me a little insight on who are a couple of guys that maybe might have been the guys that were starting to emerge that I might be talking about right now in Maryland football that might have had some flash plays in the spring game.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, on our offensive side, a guy like Dante Demas, who's a big, long, athletic, twitchy wide receiver, made a lot of plays for us last season in a rough year. He's a guy that comes to mind that showed up every game, and I would have expected him to really benefit from being in our program. I think both quarterbacks, obviously, Josh Jackson, year 2 in our system, missed a lot of time last year with injuries and just year 1. And then Lance Lejeune, who, was a heavily recruited guy that we were fortunate enough to get out of Louisiana our first year here. Both would have benefited from being able to go through spring. Our left tackle, Jalen Duncan, is a guy I think that has NFL written all over him as long as he continues to come along. Austin Fontaine was another redshirt freshman that played up front awful lot, as well as Spencer Anderson. And then on the defensive side, both our interior, both inside linebackers, Allende Ely and Chance Campbell, were both guys that have played a lot of football around here since their freshman year on the front end. And then Olu Oluwatimi, our defensive tackle, another veteran guy there. And then obviously on the back end, I think Nick Cross and the job he did as a safety, and we were welcoming back Antoine Richardson, a safety that started for us for 3 years prior before going out and missing last season with the knee injury. I think, again, both those guys, the return of Weezy at the safety position and Nick Cross in year 2, kind of would be the core of the guys that would have benefited from spring, but also have shown over the course of their time here that they have chances to be really good players in our program. And we signed we had 12 mid-year guys that we were really looking forward to see play, from Ruben Hippolyte, the linebacker out of Florida, Dede McDougal, the wide receiver. We signed a couple of JUCO offensive linemen. Jahari Branch is one that came to mind that we signed that we wanted to see, along with Jacorian Bennett, the corner out of the junior college ranks. So a lot of names, and again, sucks that we didn't get to go through spring ball, but we really feel we put a plan together to still develop our team mentally. And then once the gates open up, as we like to say, we'll try to get back to physically bringing them along to get into year 2 for our program.
You hinted at it and touched on it a little bit, but I mean, it's almost like at Maryland football that the missing piece has just been sort of a consistency and even just keeping quarterbacks healthy. I'm just curious as you look towards the 2020 season, how you feel about just sort of the future of the quarterback room and the status of it right now.
Yeah, obviously we got 2 scholarship quarterbacks in our program. We've added a couple walk-ons that we think will add really quality depth and to the room. But like you said, probably one of the missing ingredients, and a lot of people don't look at it this way, but it's what it is where the program is. I mean, I'm really the 4th head coach in 5 years here if you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
At Randy Edsel, I took over as the interim. DJ Durkin replaced me, and then Matt Canada took over for a year. So the consistency of having the same leader for a second year the same systems. I mean, we were at our banquet, and it never dawned on me until Ellis McKinney said to me, he said he had 5 position coaches in 5 years.
Wow.
And so it's hard to have any type of consistency with any type of program. But I think me coming home to the place that everybody knows I've always wanted to be brings that stability to it. The quarterback position, obviously, when you've got that many different systems that are in place, there's different philosophies on who and what kind of quarterback you want. So we've got 2 in the program, Josh Jackson, a veteran that has a year left, a guy that we think, and Lance Lejeune, that has a huge, huge upside to him. Both those guys, I think, have the ability, and now it's just the consistency of our system being in place, them being able to operate the system. And then, we're always on the lookout, obviously, to add depth to the room, because not many programs want to have 2 scholarship quarterbacks going into their season. And so we have a rainy day fund where we save the scholarship for a rainy day, and we're hoping that at some point, we may be able to add another quarterback to the mix.
I'll leave you with this, and it's the question obviously everyone's asking and wondering right now. I'm just curious, based on the conversations that you've had with administrators or people around the country, what are your expectations for the timeline, the likelihood of Maryland football in 2020?
That's a tough question, because one of the things, and I know people get pissed, but I really have taken this approach that I am just worried about today. Because, I mean, you listen to the news, you hear Dr. Fauci and all the experts, and if you get caught up in trying to prognosticate anything, I mean, it's almost frustrating for me, because you don't know. It's not going to be up to me. It's going to be up to the federal level, then the state level, and then even as we found out, some of the county levels here in the state of Maryland, as we start to open back up somewhat in the first phase of it, having to deal with the county we're located in maybe not opening up as fast as other parts. So it's way too fluid of a situation still to even begin to prognosticate. What my hopes would be is hopefully that we can get back kids on campus for academia, as well as to prepare our team to play a season. But the thing that's always going to be first and foremost in the back of my mind, or in the front of my mind, would be the safety, health, and welfare of our players and our students when they come back, as well as our staff. And as long as we can provide them with that type of environment, then I'm ready to go.
Well, Coach, really appreciate you taking some time. I hope we get to see a lot more late night with locks, but I will hope for college football first and foremost. So hopefully you don't have time for it because you're playing in the fall, but until then, I'll enjoy watching those.
Appreciate you for having me on, Barton.